Okay, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Hecker. I'm the Wellness and Benefits Consultant for MCW. So thank you for joining us on this beautiful afternoon. We appreciate it knowing it's so beautiful outside. You could be outside and maybe you could do that still when we're done this afternoon. As part of our May retirement series today, we're going to talk about making your retirement savings last, which obviously is a challenge, but important topic. And we have Joe Vigiani here from Transamerica, who's going to walk us through that this afternoon. But first, I want to take care of just a couple housekeeping details. If you can, please make sure that you are on mute. If you would like to turn your camera on, that's wonderful. We'd love to see some faces. And it helps Joe know he's talking to people other than just seeing me. But please make sure you're on mute. And then also, if you have any questions, if you could throw them in the chat. What we will do is answer questions. You know, if Joe finds a good place to stop, we can do them as we move along, but otherwise we will be sure to get to those at the end of the session. This session is being recorded so that if you want to view it later, we will put it on the financial wellness and 403B retirement pages on InfoScope for you to view at another time at your convenience. So with that, I'm going to kick it off to Joe.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Terry. Welcome all. Thanks for joining me on this beautiful day. Bring your computers outside, bring your phones outside. That works as well. So a little bit about me. My name is Joseph Vigiani. I'm one of retirement planning consultants that works directly on the MCW plan here. So I'm hired as a part of your benefits package. What I do, what my colleagues do, we're here for you. Any questions, anything you want to review, just kind of bounce ideas, look over your accounts, any and everything, really. That's why we're here. We go very, very easy questions to very, very complicated reviews. What we're talking about here today is a lot of what we do. We're going to talk about making your retirement savings last, right? So what are we doing? We're all saving for a certain point. We're all putting away a part of our paychecks for that certain point in time where we intend to use them. So up until now, it's really, you've done a great job saving, right? So you have a lump of sum in your money, in your retirement accounts. It might be 401ks, 403bs, it might be 457s, IRAs. Up until now, though, it's been save as much as possible and nothing else really mattered, right? Because you're spending your paychecks or your cash flow has been coming from your paychecks. But what happens when that stops? What happens when that paycheck stops? How do you best turn what you've done, what you've saved into that income, right? How do we best invest while taking money out of our account and not running out of money? In essence, how do we make our retirement savings last? And that's what we're going to talk about here over the next 40 or so minutes. When we're talking about retirement, there's really these 5 key areas that we speak of. And if you've seen my webinars before, you'll know we do kind of a webinar on each one of these different aspects. We even do a full webinar on all of them. But today, we're going to be focusing more on the income and the investment side. But really, what it does, it comes down to your lifestyle and what you want. From that lifestyle, you're going to have an income that you're going to need to fund that lifestyle. From that income, we use the investments to kind of supplement, synonymous with that income. And of course, legacy goals and healthcare are always a big part of retirement. So let's talk about it here for a few more minutes. Planning for retirement income. What is it? Here's what we all want. In essence, we all have different goals. We all have a different lifestyle. We all have different things that we've wanted in retirement. What it comes down to really, independence, security, freedom, flexibility. In generals, that's what we're looking for. What we have are income, we have expenses, and we have uncertainty about the future. We have income from different sources. We'll talk about those different sources of income. We have expenses. We'll look at how we should be looking at expenses, maybe a little bit different than what you're looking at it here today. And then, of course, the uncertainty of the future. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen tomorrow? So this is what we're going to focus on. And what we're going to do is we're going to see if you have a gap between what we want and what we have, or do we not have a gap? So here's why planning becomes so important. Like we said earlier, you were saving as much as possible. You're probably still doing that. You're probably in still what we called our accumulation stage. You're accumulating assets for the future. But when you retire, we're going to have to start distributing assets, right? So instead of adding to an account, adding and not taking money out, we're taking money out and no longer adding. All right. So think of it like an empty pool in your backyard that you've had your whole life. This empty pool, every time you get a paycheck, you put some money in that pool. When you put money in there, you're not really taking money out, right? It's earmarked for retirement. So that pool is getting bigger and higher and higher and higher. When you retire though, no more money is going to go into that pool. We're going to start taking money out of that pool. We're going to pull the drain on it. When we pull the drain on the pool, we want to make sure it doesn't flow out in too great of a manner. We want to make sure it's still rising just a little bit while coming out very slowly. This is the challenge: accumulation versus distribution, walking up a mountain versus walking down a mountain. So today's goals, what are we going to talk about? We're going to review any risks that come with any retirement plan in generals. Everybody has these risks that we're going to go over. We're going to walk through these 5 key areas, the key areas that we're going to talk about on how to build an income plan, or really how to make your retirement savings last. And then hopefully you're going to have some clarity and confidence that building this plan is going to be right for you and you individually. The goal here is to bring your attention to some important concepts to help you avoid some bad situations down the road, right? So over the summer last year, or actually 2020, everybody was doing home projects. I decided I wanted to build my wife a garden. Know nothing about building a garden. I'm not handy with wood, not handy with anything at all. I know investments, I know finance. That's about it though. So I go to Home Depot, I buy all this pressure treated wood because I know pressure treated wood is going to last forever. Somebody out in Home Depot, or actually one of my friends, mentioned to me that you bought all this wood, this pressure treated wood. They're like, okay, what's it for? I'm like, it's for this garden bed. He goes, you know, the pressure, the chemical they use to pressure treat that wood is going to kill anything that you're going to plant in that garden. I said, oh my gosh, why didn't I know that? It's just about bringing things to your attention to help you avoid some bad situations down the road. If all my wife's tomatoes died, she would have been very upset. So that's what the whole point in today is going to be. Whose risks? What are the risks in retirement? We can call these macro risks, right? Macro risks on a big, long picture. Longevity. We'll talk about longevity. Is longevity a risk? Yeah, right? So if you're planning for a retirement to 80 years old and you live to 96 years old, we have to have a plan in place for that. Inflation, of course. Oh my gosh, inflation is front and center. We're seeing inflation that we haven't seen since the late 70s right now. Market volatility, once again, front and center. We're seeing market volatility like we haven't seen in a very, very long time. And then, of course, uncertainty about the future, what's going to happen next. And these are the 4 macro risks for everyone. So let's talk about these each a little bit more individually. First of all, the longevity reality is 1 out of every 3 65-year-olds is going to live past 90 years old. 1 out of every 7 65 years old is going to live past age 95. What does this mean for you? This means that if you're retiring 65, 66, 70 years old, this can mean a 20 to 30 year retirement for you. Think about that for a second. Think about how different life was 20 or 30 years ago. I'll give you a clue. None of us were walking around with cell phones, checking the internet with our cell phones. If you had a cell phone, it was really, really big and bulky. You probably kept it in your car, and it cost a lot of money to take a call. Most of us had beepers, and we went to a payphone if we were outside of a hospital or outside of our house. So this is something that must be addressed. Now, of course, these are statistics, but thinking about longevity, we want to think about these statistics. We want to think about our own health. We want to think about our family's health, right? How long has people in your family lived? Do you have good genes, or do you have genes that tend to pass away earlier? So longevity is one of those things that must be addressed. And we must think about this when we're talking about making our retirement savings last. The second thing, inflation, all right? So inflation, I call it the silent killer. Inflation is the thing that's going to erode the purchasing power of our money. Lately, we've been hearing a lot of folks say, I can't handle the volatility. My account is down 10, 15%, so I'm going to move to all cash. But if you're doing that, if you're moving to all cash accounts, you're just moving a risk from volatility of risk to inflation risk. So if your fixed accounts or if your cash accounts are paying you 1 to 2%, but inflation is at 10%, 8% where it is now, that means your purchasing power is diminishing by about 6%. All right. This is important concept to understand. This means if you have $500,000 in retirement savings, that $500,000 is going to buy you less and less and less each year. So we have to have a plan to hedge inflation. We have to have a plan to have our money grow at least with inflation. This chart here is showing the average annual inflation rate, which is a very important concept to understand. But right now we're seeing inflation rates up here. This is, again, important to understand because we need to have a plan in place for whatever happens next. Inflation risk, a big risk, a silent killer, something that we have to take account of. And of course, market volatility risk, right? It seems every appointment I have, every time I speak now, we're speaking about market volatility. Market volatility is really unpredictable returns that we're going to see over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 10 years. What we can do in times like these is we can take a step back and say, I know the last 5 months have been really bad, but what does it look like over the next year? What about the next 5 years? What about the next 10 years? Remember that longevity slide we just looked at? Your retirement is probably going to last 10 to 20, maybe even 30 years for some of you. That means we can have a long-term view on at least some of our assets and at least some of our money. With that in mind, that means we can start looking at the averages, right? So over a lifetime, or really over from 1988, I lost my pen here, give me one sec. From 1988 to 2017, the markets on average were about 10%. If you look back even further, the markets on average are about 7%. If you look even more to a diversified portfolio like most of you are in, on average, you're going to see 4 to 6 to 7%, right? So we can start looking at those averages as a means to protect against volatility. But volatility risk is real, especially in the first years of retirement. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then lastly, uncertainty, right? So what's uncertainty? Uncertainty are things like inflation that we spoke about, healthcare, right? Healthcare costs. We didn't even talk about healthcare as inflation. Inflation in healthcare is on average about 5% per year. Emergencies that come up, do you have a plan in place for that? Tax rates. Are they going higher? Are they going lower? They seem to change every 4 years these days. Varying sources of income. Are you going to use kind of a phased out retirement, meaning you're not going to be working one day and then completely not working the next day? Or are you going to work 1 or 2 days a week sometimes? Your timing of your income, when are you going to take those distributions? Is it a monthly basis? Is it the beginning of the year or the end of the year? And loss of income. What happens if you have a loss of income, like a loss of Social Security if a spouse dies, or a loss of income when you stop working completely? Nobody has a crystal ball. If we did, retirement planning would be easy. Looking at these macro risks first and foremost and understanding that these are risks for all of us together, these are things to start looking at. So what do we do? How do we individually, how do we start making a plan? Really a plan, like I said, is to avoid some bad situations down the road. I like to think of it as a GPS. If you put your destination in a GPS, even if you know where you're going, the GPS is going to take you around traffic. It's going to take you around maybe some road work that's going on. If you know where you're going and you don't pop it in the GPS, you're probably going to hit some traffic. You're probably going to hit that roadblock, and it's going to take you a lot longer. Having a plan is a GPS. It's going to get you around different situations and give you confidence that you're still going to get to your end destination. So What are the 5 key areas? Let's talk about the 5 key areas, the 5 steps to making your retirement last. First and foremost, you want to estimate your expenses in retirement. What does your retirement look like? How much are you going to be spending? This is a big part of it. Part 2, identify your sources of retirement income. What types of income do you have? Part 3, do you have a gap between the income that you have and the expenses that you have? This is an extremely important part of the whole income planning process. You want this to be done before you actually get into retirement. Number 4, filling the gap. How do you fill the gap if there is a gap? There are different types of approaches, and we're going to talk about all those as well. Number 5, please don't overestimate this. Monitoring and update your plan periodically. This is extremely important, especially in retirement. Things are going to change in retirement. Your expenses are likely to fluctuate in retirement. There's an idea called in your first years of retirement called the go-go years. Your expenses actually tend to tick up a little bit. Then as you start falling into your situation, they tend to tick down a little bit when you get in habits in your everyday lifestyle. Okay, so let's talk about each one of these 5 points a little bit more in depth. First and foremost, to figure out our expenses, figure out part 1. What are you going to be doing in retirement? All right. We took a survey back in 2020, and this is what most people said. Most people are saying traveling, spending more time with family, pursuing hobbies, volunteer work. But what does it look like for you? This is just a survey. It really doesn't mean anything for you individually. But what have you been doing? You've been living on your company's terms or whoever you've been working for most of your life. They say you have to be at work at this time or you have to do this at this time. Now you're free. You're free to spend time the way you like to. Sometimes it makes sense to do a little exercise. So the exercise is thinking about where you want your perfect retirement to be. So I call myself kind of a retirement genie. So let's put ourselves in a different situation for a second. Let's pretend you're walking down the block and you see genie lamp. You see it in the bushes. It looks like that lamp from Aladdin. So you're super intrigued and you want to pick it up. You pick up this genie lamp and out pops me, your retirement genie. And I say, I'm going to grant you the perfect retirement. You don't have to worry about money. You don't have to worry about anything other than being happy. I say, snap my fingers. And when you wake up tomorrow morning, you're going to have the perfect retirement. So like, this is great. Love it. Run home, have a quick dinner, have a quick glass of wine, go to bed. You wake up tomorrow morning and the birds are chirping. The clouds are kind of perfect going by. The sun is just that right sunshine. You walk downstairs or you walk to your kitchen. How do you know you have that perfect retirement? What do you do that morning? What do you do that afternoon? What do you do that evening? Who are you with? How are you spending full days? Are you traveling anywhere? Or are you staying mostly local? Are you volunteering any time anywhere? This is an extremely important exercise to do if you don't have that idea, because remember, your lifestyle is going to change. Your lifestyle is going to change from your company's terms to your terms. Oftentimes, we see people living life with things that they truly value. Here's a little secret that I've learned from doing this exercise with folks over time, over years. Look at pictures on your phone first. Look at pictures that you've taken. Look at old photo albums that you've kept. These are things you value. We take pictures, we snap pictures of events, experiences, people that we love and value. This is most likely how you're going to be spending your retirement, right? You're going to be spending retirement in things that you value. Once you have this idea in your head, we can try and quantify it. That vision is going to be the goal of what we're going to shoot at for the expenses, right? So that goal is now the target. So when we're thinking about that vision, we want to try and break that down into expenses, okay? How do we quantify that vision that you've come up with? So if we look at, and you can use any type of budget, you can use any type of spending plan, you can use whatever you'd like. This is one we have for you. I'll send it out. I'll send it to Terry so she can send it out to the group later on. Really, what we're looking at is a total spending. We want to look at your total spending expenses over here. Once we have that total of spending, we want to break it down into essentials And then discretionary expenses, essentials, things you must be paying for on an every month basis, no matter what. Mortgage, property tax, homeowners insurance, repairs, maintenance, groceries, utilities, Medicare, right? Things you must be paying for on an every month basis, no matter what happens. Then your discretionary income, or your discretionary expenses rather, are going to be things you've always wanted to do, like dining out, going on vacations, club memberships, spending time doing things that you love, hobbies, whatever it's going to mean for you. These are things that you've always wanted, dreams that you've always had of retirement. Once we have those essentials and discretionaries, and I'll tell you why we're going to break those down into separate areas, that total expense is an important thing to understand, because this comes from the vision. This comes from the quantifying of the vision. Now we have a goal of which to shoot at. Is your vision quantified as $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month, $1,000 a month? It's going to look different for each and every one of us. We're all in different scenarios. Your retirement plan is going to be unique to you. This is an important concept to understand as well. Unique to you. Don't worry about what your neighbor's doing. Don't worry about what the other person next door is doing, your best friend. We're all in different, unique financial situations. So what's right for them might not be right for you. Step two, right? So step one was coming up with that vision and quantifying that vision. Step two is really identifying your different sources of income, right? Step two, this is like a jigsaw puzzle. This step, think about when you first open a jigsaw puzzle, you're going to take it out of the box, dump it all over the floor, and it looks like a mess. It looks like just a bunch of cut up cardboard pieces. It makes no sense. But once you start putting everything, you find the corners, you find the borders of the puzzle, you start putting these things all together, it starts making more sense. The picture starts coming together, the picture that you've always been going for. This is step two, getting a catalog of all your sources. You might have sources like employment if you're using a phased out. Savings and investments, right? We all know about the savings and investments, your 403Bs, your 457s, any savings accounts that you have, any other IRAs you might have, or old retirement accounts that you have as well. You might have pensions. You're all going to have Social Security. Now, how do we break this down? What are we looking at here? We're looking at reliable sources of income versus discretionary sources of income. Reliable sources of income are incomes that are going to be paying us on an every month basis. We know Social Security is going to be paying you on an every month basis. No matter what happens out there in the markets, Social Security will be paying you. Most of the time, a pension is also going to be paying you on an every month basis. So these are our reliable sources of income. That paycheck is coming to us on a reliable form every month. Why do we want to break those down? All right, we're going to break these down into reliable sources versus discretionary sources. We're going to see that in a few minutes, but let's focus here on the foundation. All right, Social Security and pensions. This is going to be the foundation of your income plan. If we say, or making your retirement last, if we say you have a house, right, and that house, this is your discretionary sources, or this is your full making your retirement last. The foundation, the underneath part here is going to be your Social Security and your pensions. This is what everything else is built on top of, because again, it's reliable. Social Security, what is it? First of all, everyone is eligible for Social Security as long as you have about 10 years in the workforce. If you do not, most of the people on this call I know most likely do. If you do not, then you're not eligible, but you're still eligible for spousal benefits. Social Security is looking at something called your PIA, or your primary insurance amount. This is the 35 years of your work history and what you've earned the most. This is important to understand on how Social Security is calculated. Some of you have been out of the workforce for some of that 35-year period. Oftentimes we see that with husbands or wives who left the workforce to help raise children. If you have some zeros in that 35-year period, keep that in mind, because if you're at 34 years or 33 years and you have 2 zeros in there, the next 2 years that you're going to work, those zeros are going to drop off and a higher portion is going to tack on your Social Security. It's going to mean a higher amount for you. Higher amounts are also going to go by claiming strategies. You can claim as early as 62 years old up until 70 years old. You're all going to have, you're all going to have a full retirement age, but you can claim earlier for reduced benefits, or you can claim later on for what we call delayed credits. Claiming strategies. Also with claiming strategies are going to be spousal strategies. Are you married? Because if you are, Social Security is looking at you like you're a team. And the impact of working in retirement, that's something to consider if you're already receiving Social Security benefits. If you have not already, please visit ssa.gov. If you don't know your estimates, you can go there, create an account for yourself, understand what your individual Social Security is going to look like. And like, again, this is important to understand because this is going to be the foundation of what everything else is going to be built on for making your retirement income last. And then pensions, once again. So pensions, what do you want to know? Some of you might have old pensions outside of MCW. What you want to know is how much, when is it available? Is it available 62, 66, 70? And what are the payout options? Can you take a lump sum? Do you have to take a monthly benefit? Are there joint and survivor options as well? Those are a few things that you want to look at. Remember, reliable sources of income are going to be the foundation of everything else. Now, your discretionary sources. These are things that are most familiar for folks. These are going to be things like your 401ks, 403bs, 457s, IRAs, personal savings, wages, if you're working part-time. These are things that are important because discretionary income sources are very, very flexible at this moment in time, right? You can't just say to Social Security, if you're late or your boiler breaks and you need $50,000 for a new boiler, you can't say, Social Security, please, front me for the next several months. They're not going to do it. This is where discretionary sources of income come from. They're very, very flexible. And we're going to talk about why we're looking at reliable sources versus discretionary sources. Okay, now let's start looking here. Remember, step one is when we broke down our essentials versus our discretionary expenses. And here's why. We know our pensions and Social Securities are going to consist of our reliable sources of income. Our reliable sources of income make sense that they're going to pay our every month basis, right? Our every month expenses. Remember our essential expenses earlier. Our essential expenses, things that must be paid for on an every month basis. Healthcare is included in that. If we have our reliable sources of income, the check that's coming to us on an every month basis, covering our essential expenses, we're in a really good shape, right? We don't ever have to worry about anything else coming from other sources, okay? Now, your discretionary income sources, which is what we spoke about, can then be saved for your discretionary expenses, going out to dinner, going on vacations, doing whatever you want with your money. It's very flexible. Freedom, flexibility, right? And if you have any legacy goals, legacy means leaving money to your heirs or leaving money to someone, charities perhaps. Is that a goal of yours? So we want to start looking at things as essential versus discretionary and reliable versus flexible. These are the first few steps of creating an income plan that's going to have your savings last you. Okay. Let's look at an example here for step 3. Right? Remember, step 3 was figuring out if you have a gap. We're going to visit this slide again later on, but let's just focus on a second. Let's look at someone who's just looking at their total expenses, which is traditionally what people have looked at for retirement. So in this example, this person has reliable income sources of about $2,500 a month. Okay. They have total expenses of about $5,500 a month. Remember, we're just looking at total expenses as traditionally was done. So if a reliable income source is $2,500 and their total expense is $5,500, there's an income gap of about $3,000 per month. Now here is where all the confusion comes up. Here is where you're going to come up with, if you do a Google search, 50 different strategies. Usually it comes down to who is trying to sell you something. So let's look at these different strategies of filling the gap. Really, it's going to come down to flexibility versus sustainability. All right, there are two arguments out there in the retirement planning world. The sustainability that says you should cover all of your monthly expenses with sustainable sources, meaning you should create all of your savings and turn that all into reliable income. Immediate annuities are a strategy for that. Guaranteed income products are a strategy for that as well. Then on the other side, the flexible sides, these folks say you should use traditional assets. You should use traditional portfolios because you could take money as you need it. The money is very flexible. With the sustainable option, you're pretty much giving up all of your savings for the sustainability, for a monthly paycheck coming to you, right? Flexibility really means withdrawing as much as you want whenever you want to. And sustainability refers to the likelihood that the income you're going to receive is going to last as long as you do. So there's two separate arguments for it. I feel like it's the Republicans versus the Democrats, or even the conservatives versus the liberals. They're really never going to agree on anything. So let's look at really the two arguments for both. If you've done research in retirement planning, you are likely to come across the 4% rule. The 4% rule, if you haven't heard about it, is back in 1990, or back in the early 90s, there was a gentleman, a financial planner. His name was William Bengen. He came up with this idea of the 4% rule. You see, before he came up with this rule, retirement planning was looking at the average returns in the stock market and saying, okay, if the stock market is returning on 7% on average, you can safely withdraw 7% per year. Really, that didn't make any sense. People knew it didn't make sense, right? Because we know the stock market is down sometimes, it's up sometimes. We never know that's going to be up. That's just an average. We never know it's going to be at 7% per year, just an average. So he tried to figure out a study, and he got a hold of data. He went through all kinds of studies going back to the 1920s. And he came up with this rule, this idea that if you withdraw 4% of your initial retirement account and increase that amount every year based on inflation, your money is likely to last about 30 years, okay? And this is really the traditional investment asset, folks, argument. It's good. It's a good starting point, right? But it's not the end all be all. The reason is there are drawbacks. Like every rule, there are going to be drawbacks into it. Drawbacks include not taking into account the timing in which you retire. This is so big, right? So if you're going to retire, think about the folks who retired in 2007 after the markets were good for so long. All of a sudden, 2008 came around. If they're pulling out, if they decided to follow this 4% rule, and then the markets, their portfolio was down 40 to 50%, that 4% actually became 8%, right? So all of a sudden, that throws this rule completely out of whack. At that point, those folks had to draw into principal in a great amount. This is known as what we call in the finance world, sequence of returns risk. So the idea is you are going to see 7% or so in the market on average. But what if you're one of the unlucky folks who retires with their portfolio less than half of what it was? That means the 4% rule is not going to play into factor for you. That means you're drawing into your principal in your first years of retirement, which is going to cut your retirement savings down, okay? Things are going to change over time, and it's impossible to know how long your assets are going to last because we don't know what the exact return from next year to the year after is going to be. So lately, there's been a lot more studies based on that 4% rule and really what's going to work, what actually works. So again, the traditional investment side of things. Let's look at this 4% rule. So this chart, let me just explain it a little bit. This is looking at three types of people, or three types of strategies, excuse me. One strategy, two strategy, three strategy, and it's looking at three separate types of portfolios. A conservative portfolio here has about 25% in stock. The moderate portfolio in this study is about 50% in stock. The aggressive portfolio has about 75% in stock. Let's start with the 4% rule, right? The 4% rule, and in a conservative portfolio during this study, really was the 2% rule. meaning you can only safely draw down about 1.9% of your assets if you're a conservative type of investor. Isn't that what we've all heard? Be more conservative in retirement. So you're saying the 4% rule doesn't apply? It would be really a 2% rule. What about the moderate portfolio? Again, this would be more of a 3% rule, but you would have to be in 50% stock. The 4% rule only becomes a factor if you're 75% in stock. 75%. That's considered more of an aggressive portfolio, isn't it? And this is because interest rates have been low for so long, right? Different market environments are going to determine different types of outlooks for you. Different strategies, spending with 2% cost of living adjustment, right? Same type of thing. The 4% rule is more of a moderate portfolio, but you're only adjusting it by 2% per year, your initial withdrawal. Your fixed spending does the best, but there's no growth in your spending. We know there's going to be growth in your spending, right? We know inflation is there. So if you're taking 10% or $10,000 a month, whatever it's going to be, then you can safely say in a moderate portfolio, you have a safe spending rate of about 4.5%. These are important to know, but focusing here, we know this 4% rule might be a little aggressive. And that's because if you're not an aggressive investor, meaning your portfolio is going through ebbs and flows because you're in 75% stocks, that 4% rule is going to be very, very aggressive. So with your withdrawals should include the type of retirement you want, right? The vision that we spoke about earlier, the amount of risk you're comfortable with. Are you up at night because your portfolio is fluctuating? Or are you up at night because you feel like you're not going to be able to live your retirement goals? And then the future performance of the underlying assets, meaning what is your portfolio designed to do for you individually? And this becomes your risk at this point in time. Your risk is not living the retirement lifestyle that you've always wanted. It's not who's president. It's not what the macroeconomics are doing. It's none of that. It's designing what's going to be suitable for you. So the other side of the argument, are going to say, well, look at that 4% rule. Look at, we can't predict what's going to happen next. So you want to take all your money and you want to put it in guaranteed income products. Oftentimes these products look like fixed and variable annuities. Okay. Here's the problem with this. These are sustainable solutions, right? They're going to last for as long as you last, which is great. But you're giving up almost all your flexibility to be able to pay you what you actually need. There are generally very, very high fees in these types of products. Some might not even provide inflation protection. And if they do, it's another substantial fee. There are been some studies that show some of these types of products, the fees are much greater than the payouts. So while it provides sustainability, it gives up complete flexibility and typically provide very high fees in some of these types of accounts. Another type of argument is a single premium immediate annuity, meaning I just want an annuity. I'm going to give you some of my money and I want a fixed payment for the rest of my life, right? The previous one is going to be more of a variable. You're going to see it vary based on the returns of the underlying investments. Here you get higher guaranteed initial payouts, but once again, you lose flexibility, you have no access to cash, and you may or may not have inflation protection, which we know is important going forward. Creating an income plan that's right for you. So those are kind of the two sides of the arguments. What does it mean for you, for us as individuals? What we see, what we've seen to work over time is this idea of an income floor. An income floor means guaranteeing solutions for only things that you need guaranteed, right? So in this way, you're taking advantage of both the flexibility and the sustainability by providing an income floor is what we call it. Okay, so we want your reliable income sources that we spoke about earlier to be equal to or greater than your essential expenses. And then your discretionary income sources will give you that flexibility to do what you want, to get that growth that you need. Let's use that scenario that we spoke about earlier. 2007, a retiree. Let's say they use this income flooring strategy. The income floor says their essential expenses are now covered by their reliable income sources. So if the markets do go down by, 50%, 40%, they don't have to draw down on that portfolio, meaning they're not compounding their losses because their essentials are already taken care of. Maybe they don't take that vacation. Maybe they don't go out to eat as much because of the fact that if you're drawing down from a portfolio that's down, we're compounding losses. But if we give it a chance to come back, that's a great advantage in and that traditional side of the investments argument. Let's look at this slide again. Let's say, for example, we're not going to look at our total expenses. We're only going to look at our essential expenses in this case. Our essential expenses, let's just say, are about $3,000 in this example. Okay, so if our essential expenses are $3,000, our reliable income sources are $2,500. That means instead of a $3,000 gap, we're only looking at about a $500 gap. So in that case, maybe we do take some of our savings and create a reliable source of income from it. Maybe that's when we do create that sustainability, saying, okay, now in order to create that floor, I know I could take some of my savings and put it into a product that's going to give me $500 a month. That $500 a month is going to cover my essential expenses, which is going to mean I have that income floor in place. Now we can have a longer term view on the markets, right? We can have a longer term view on our traditional portfolios. If we have that, the probabilities become very, very high that we're going to be successful. The further we go out on our portfolio, our traditional portfolio, balanced portfolios, the higher the probability that's going to be higher. But if we're drawing down 4%, 5%, 6% on an every month or an every year basis, especially if the markets are down, that becomes trouble. This is how we make our retirement savings not last. A flooring strategy is one of those things that we look at to allow your retirement savings to last. In fact, to last a very long time. Okay, step 5, monitoring your plan, right? So this is sometimes overlooked. Monitoring your plans is so important. There's going to be change in your retirement goals most likely, right? Are you the same person, or did you have the same idea, the same goals that you did 20 or 30 years ago? No, probably not. Increase or decrease of expenses. We spoke about this a little bit earlier, but in retirement planning, there's this idea called the retirement smile. Let's say your retirement is X year, right? We see your spending tick up a little bit. And then as we fall into our, everyday life, we see it tick down a little bit. But then as we get older, healthcare costs go up. We need a little bit more to help assist us living. We see expenses go up again. It kind of looks like a smile. This is the retirement smile that we're looking at. Increase or decrease in expenses. This is where monitoring your plan on an each and every year basis is going to make a lot of sense. Monitoring investment performance. Is it still online? Is the portfolio that you're in still suitable for you individually? Change in legacy desires. We see this sometimes, right? So I spoke with somebody last month who called me only to take her kids off as beneficiaries. Won't go into the details of it, but legacy desires have changed greatly for that person. And an impact of taxes, right? Tax rates are going to fluctuate. We don't know what taxes are going to be 10 years from now. We don't know what they're going to be 5 years from now. We have to have a plan for all these things. Continually monitoring your portfolio is a much different scenario now than it was than you were in the accumulation stage. Reviewing the 5 steps. First, estimate your expenses in retirement. Remember, when we're estimating them, we're going to have a total number, then we're going to have our essentials and discretionaries. We want to know what your essentials are versus your discretionaries. Once we have those essentials versus discretionaries, we're going to identify those sources of income. Once we have those sources of income, we're going to break them down into their reliabilities. What is paying you on an every month basis? What can be let to grow for the long term? Between those two things, step 1 and 2, is there an income gap between your essentials and reliable sources of income? If there is, how do you plan on addressing it? What are the different methods to closing that gap, step 4. And then step 5, obviously monitoring and updating the plan periodically. Remember, this part is important. If you don't have your expenses, you don't have anything to shoot for. Remember that exercise we spoke about earlier. Spend an hour with your spouse or just you or your loved ones. Write these things down. Write down what you want to be doing in retirement. Look through your pictures first. Go through picture albums. What makes you happy? What do you truly value in life? Because that's how you're going to be spending your time. What does that cost? How do we quantify that? So that is the idea of making your retirement last. At the very essence, if you've been on any appointments with me, you know I like to draw this triangle here. This triangle is really what I call a retirement portfolio. Up here is going to be your goals, right? That vision. How do you quantify that vision? Once you do, we're going to have an idea of how much money you're going to need from your portfolios. Once we do steps 1 and 2, once we find out your reliable income sources, and once we figure out your essential expenses and discretionary expenses. And then this part of the triangle is how you feel about risk, right? Never want to be up at night because you're taking on too much risk. You're worried about losing all your money. And you never want to be in danger of not living the dream that you've always had for retirement. Now, I always talk about this tick that you have to have. If you want to do all this on your own, you want to have a tick. You want to have the time, the interest, and the knowledge to be able to do this on your own. If you don't, this is when a financial professional is going to come into favor for you. So with that said, that's me, Joseph Vigiani. I am one of your retirement planning consultants. As a part of your benefits package, I'm here for you. This is a QR code. If you would like to make an appointment with me, I'm here for you. mcw.retirement@transamerica.com. If this, for whatever reason, is not working, or you just have a quick question, or you want a question answered that you don't want answered on this general forum, send me an email. We'll get on the phone, or we'll just communicate through emails. So with that, I want to open it up for any questions. And Terry, if any questions have come in while I was speaking, we can address those now.
So far, I have no other questions that have been asked, so I'm going to just give people a minute. If you would like to put a question in the chat, please do so. Otherwise, while you do that, I just want to mention tomorrow we have another session in the May retirement series from noon to 1, and it is the retirement pre-launch checklist. With Tim Shirk of Francis Investment Council. He did our prior session last week. And we have a few other sessions upcoming, but I just want to mention that this week, the other session is tomorrow from noon to 1. And I think you did a great job. And I think we have been asked if the session is being recorded. We are recording this session. We will post it on the Financial Wellness and 403B websites for you to view at a later time for your convenience. And I will get that worksheet from Joe and send that to all of you tomorrow as well. So you have that as a working document, and Joe can help guide you through that as we go forward. So with that said, everybody's saying thank you, Joe. So so far, no questions. We do have, let's see, I'm gonna see if I can. What if we do have a question? So I'm going to just throw this to you, Joe. What if you don't have a pension and you just have the 403B plan and Social Security? What are we taking out to use for income?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So that's going to come to, if you don't have that pension, so your Social Security is now going to be your foundation. All right. So first, we're going to look at claiming strategies. When do you claim? Claiming strategies is going to be different for everyone, right? So do you need to cash flow earlier, or does it make sense to wait? Once we understand the claiming strategies and what's going to make more sense for you, then at some point, if you need more than that, if you have an income gap between your expenses, your essential expenses, and that Social Security payment, then we would look at maybe taking some 403B money if that's your total amount of savings. Again, we would look at everything all together. Remember that jigsaw puzzle analogy that we used earlier. We would see what's the best source to take it from to guarantee some for you to create that income floor. So it's going to be different for everyone. There's no right or wrong answer there. It's just going to be looking into your situation and figuring out what's going to be best for you. I can certainly help you do that if you'd like.
An additional question, what do you recommend in this down market?
Yes, the
That's the
million dollar
golden
question.
question. I was
Yes.
thinking the same thing.
So it really comes to what is your goals and how is this affecting your overall goal, right? Remember, even if you're close to retirement, the majority of your savings is going to be for the long term. Remember that you're longevity, right? So even though it's terrible to look at the past 5 months and see what's happening, there is no evidence that says taking my money and sending it all to cash is the right answer. In fact, usually that's the wrong answer. Two reasons: inflation is sky high, that your fixed accounts are not paying enough to keep pace with inflation. So you're taking on inflation risk at that point. The second thing to think about is really the volatility. Volatility tends to not last longer on average than 14 or so months. So the next thing to look at is when you're going to need the money from your portfolio. Are you going to need it right away within the next 2, really 5 years? Or is most of it going to be for the long term? So if you're in a well-diversified portfolio, if your portfolio aligns with this triangle, right? Your goals, when you're going to need the money, the amount of money, and your feeling, then it's about, staying the course, keeping an eye on that long-term picture. Your portfolio should have a goal intended in mind. It shouldn't just be, when you're thinking about retirement planning, shouldn't just be about, hey, what's the market doing today or tomorrow or this month? It should be, what's my portfolio designed to do for me for the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's the golden question right now for probably many people.
Yes.
I do see we have a hand raised, actually two. One thing, if you would like to unmute, hopefully you can do that and ask your question. If not, I would ask that you put it in the chat. So I don't know if that person can unmute or not. And then we also had a hand raised from Barbie. And I don't see an option for me to unmute you, so you would have to unmute yourself. And with that, I don't see that that's happening. So if you can please put the question in the chat, I'll throw another question to Joe while you maybe can do that. Are we taking out of our 403B the gains or the principal balance?
Ideally, right, it's the gains. So when you're designing an income portfolio or making your savings last, ideally it would be only the gains, but sometimes it can't be that, right? Sometimes we have to start eating into the principal because those markets fluctuate, right? So there is no way to say, hey, I just want my gains taken out unless your plan says it. So if you have your expenses that you're going to need at $500 a month, but your gains are much greater than $500 a month, then yes, you're taking out gains. But in vice versa, to think about it, if your expenses are $5,000 a month and your portfolio is only generating $3,000 a month, you still need to live on that $5,000 a month. So you'd be taking gains and principal at that point.
And you'd be paying taxes on both with that, correct?
Yes, precisely. Good question. So anytime you take money out of a 403B or 457B, any pre-tax money, keep in mind pre-tax, because you also have some Roth options in this plan. Pre-tax money, anytime we see that, is going to come out at ordinary income tax, meaning it's all going to be looked at as income by the IRS, not capital gains, income. So if you're taking $50,000, you have $50,000 worth of income for that year, and that's going to fit you in a tax bracket. When you're taking money out of a 403B, there's a 20% mandatory withholding, but you may pay more or less than that at the end of the year. So if you have a withholding of 20% when you take money out of your 403B, but you're in a 30% tax bracket, you're going to end up owing some later on when you do your taxes, or vice versa. If you're in a 20% tax bracket, if you're in a 20% withholding and you're only in a 15% tax bracket, you might get some of that money back at the end of the year.
And it sounded like you're not in favor of annuities due to lack of flexibility. Briefly, but understanding everyone's situation is different, are there any general advantages of using an annuity to cover an income gap?
Yeah, so the income gap is important because of the sustainability, and that's where annuities would come into favor. It's not that we hate annuities or love annuities, is they're a tool in a toolbox to get you to what you need, right? So using those two examples of the far left only saying, traditional assets and the other side saying all annuities, that's like saying I have a hammer in my toolbox, so I'm going to hammer a screw. But if you have a hammer and a screwdriver, you can use the proper tool for each. So yes, using an annuity to cover an income gap would be a great use of the annuities. But anything up and above that, you're going to lose a lot of flexibility. You're going to pay high fees normally. But creating an annuity for an income gap is usually a good strategy for folks.
Okay, I hope I got all the questions. If I missed a question, please don't hesitate. You can obviously email Joe, as he mentioned, or you can send it to me and I can forward it to Joe, whatever is easier for you. I'm happy to do that to assist. So with that, thank you for joining us this afternoon on this very beautiful day. Get out and take a walk, and hopefully we'll see you at tomorrow's session. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.